And we'll talk about selecting a journal. And what are the reasons that you would choose certain journals, right? Well, one might be speed, right? Certain journals are faster than others. But let's go through the sort of timetable of doing research. This is after you've got the grant, thought about it, and done it. Once you're actually in the field work can be weeks or years. Lab work, if you have lab work, can be weeks or years. Analyses, for me, is closer to the years than the weeks. Write-up can take forever. Reviewing can be 3 to 6 months. Revisions can be 2 to 12 months. A decision, sometimes it takes the editors months to make a decision, right? Publication can be 3 to 12 months. So just the publication side of it can be 9, but closer to 36 months. I mean, it's not uncommon for the review process to go well over a year. Right? It's not uncommon at all. So you may choose journals that have a reputation for being quicker on that, depending on your situation. If you need to get that publication out for your wins, you might choose a journal that's got a reputation for speed. In saying that, be careful of the game, right? The game means that they assign new manuscript numbers at the end of the process so that their speed of publication is quicker, right? What I mean by that is it takes a year to go through the peer review system. They reject your paper at the last minute, but they're not rejecting it. So you send it back in and they give you a new number so that it gets accepted within 3 weeks. And then your paper, then their time to review is really, really short. You may choose a journal for speed, but know that you should actually make sure that it is a quick turnaround and they're not just playing the game. Of course, the subject matter and audience is really important. Who reads this journal, right? Each journal has its own style, its own audience, and particular topics it's looking for. You could write the best paper in the world. Findings are brilliant, totally important, and it might get rejected outright because it's just the wrong journal. It's not what they do in that journal. You could also waste months or even years in review by sending it to a series of inappropriate journals. And I think, this is where incentives sometimes misalign with research needs, right? Sometimes there's incentives to publish in certain journals even though we're not working on that thing. And so, people feel like they should be publishing in certain journals, but the research actually isn't suited to that, so they waste a lot of time. It's not only their own time, people have to review it, people have to look at it, so a lot of energy gets wasted sending things to inappropriate journals. So one thing you can do is look for appropriate aims and scopes. You can ask yourself, who reads this journal and who do I want to read my paper, right? Who is it that I'm hoping is going to read it? Is it managers? Is it conservation biologists? Is it coral specialists? Is it development specialists? Who do you want to read it? And what journals do they read? Or if none of them, then it may not matter. You're just trying to get it out there so then you can write a policy brief about it. So in the material that you'll receive, I've got my sort of where to publish in marine conservation guide, and I've gone through and sort of taken the aims and scopes of pretty much all of the journals that I thought were relevant at least a couple of years ago. And so you can see here, this one, Ambio, is one I've never published in, but I think is a great journal. An international journal publishing original articles, reports, and comments on development and issues in environmental research, policy, and related activities. So, okay, so that one might be really relevant for you. Conservation biology. We welcome submissions that address the science and practice of conserving Earth's biological diversity. Journal encourages submissions that emphasize issues germane to any of Earth's ecosystems or geographic regions, blah, 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 blah. In some of these, though, I've made my own notes here. So I'm on the board of conservation biology, so I've made some notes in there from my experience, right? Which is, conservation biology is widely considered the premier journal in the conservation field. As such, articles in here are expected to transcend particular locations or ecosystems. Your paper has to be of interest to people working on forest or agriculture or anything at all, not just on your niche area. And papers are expected to find a novel problem, or better yet, find a novel solution. Simply repeating a study in a different location or confirming well-established theory won't fly in this journal. And I think all of this is probably entirely applicable to any of the top journals, right? They are going to want a study that's of interest to everyone in the broad field, not just in your specialization. So if your paper's really about fisheries, and it's not about whatever, maybe it's about commons dilemmas or broader resource use and overexploitation, if so, frame it in those broader ways, and then you might have a chance in one of the top journals like Conservation Biology. If it's really about fishing and that's the only thing it's about, it's probably not going to go into a top journal like this. Like, I wouldn't even send it out for review if that was it. If it wasn't about the broader issues that somebody that's only doing farming is interested in. They're not going to read a thing on fishing, so it's not going to go into this journal. Ocean and coastal management, again, dedicated to the study of all aspects of ocean and coastal management at the international, national, regional, and local levels, blah, blah, blah. Anyway, all of these things are in that guide that you'll have. Prestige, there's a hierarchy or prestige or status among journals. And if you're not in a hurry and you're thick-skinned, there can be some value in shooting high, but again, don't waste people's time sending something that's actually really poor, really localized to a top journal. It's not really going to get in, but you're going to kill a lot of manpower doing it. And here's my advice: when to shoot for a top journal. Are your results going to change the way that people do business? Is someone going to change the way they do their job because of your paper, your findings and your results? And if not, it's probably not a top journal quality. It's just sort of confirming things or doing it in a different location. We already knew that, but it's just more evidence for it. That's important and it's good to do, but it's not top journal material. So maybe don't waste your time and other people's time sending it to a top journal. If, on the other hand, it really does, if this is actually important and it's going to change the way that people actually do their job, yeah, give it a crack at a top journal. That's important. People are going to be changing practice because of that. You might get lucky even if it gets rejected. So you might get lucky, and then you might also get good feedback along the way. Sometimes they get really good reviewers, and you get some excellent comments, and it helps strengthen the paper. I'll just make a note, and it's probably similar in development, but in conservation, publishing in prestigious journals matters less than it does in academia, right? So in conservation, the speed of publication can be more important than prestige. Sometimes, it's the last endangered species of this whatever critter in the Amazon, and it's more important to get it out than to get it out in a top journal. And so in some cases, speed is more important than prestige. So just think about really what your goal is and whether speed is more important than prestige. If prestige is important, it might take a while. For better or worse, the main way that scientists measure the prestige or the impact of a journal is called the impact factor. And it's widely criticized, but it's also what there is. So a lot of people critique it, but there aren't many solutions to that problem. So the impact factor is a measure of the frequency with which the average article in a journal is cited in a particular year. It's calculated by dividing the number of all current citations of items published by that journal during the previous 2 years, divided by the number of articles the journal published in those 2 years, right? So it's the number of citations divided by the number of articles. And in the first 2 years, right? So the last 2 years of it. So you sort of, if you think about it, it's like, what's the average number of citations that a journal will get over 2 years? An average article will get over 2 years in that journal. What it doesn't tell you is about the variability, quite often the standard deviation is way bigger than that mean. So in ones with high impact factors, there's plenty of papers that get 0 citations. So just publishing in that journal doesn't mean you will get the number of citations that the average does, right? That can be skewed by a couple of popular articles or whatever. So, so the main one is the sort of Thomson's Reuters, the sort of ISI one. That's the main one that they do. It's more conservative than things like Google Scholar, right? Google Scholar tends to pick up some stuff that's not in journals, that's in things like theses and sort of academically oriented reports. And so it tends to overinflate this number of citations relative to the sort of, the ISI ones there. So that's the main one that people are using and referring to. It's also, by the way, proprietary, right? So you actually have to pay for access to it. Yeah. Which probably isn't a mistake on their part, but yeah. So the impact factor is useful in understanding the significance of absolute citation frequencies, right? It tends to discount the advantages of large journals over small ones, right? Because they're publishing a lot of papers, right? They also get it divided by that large number of papers. Whereas something like the H index, right? Do you guys know what an H index is? Are you familiar with that? It's sort of the number of, so my H index is the number of publications I have that have been cited at least that many times, right? So, whatever, I've got mine's 59. So I have 59 publications that have been cited at least 59 times, right? So that's the way that they calculate that. And they do that for journals, but the number of publications that you have may influence that, right? It is related to the number, whereas impact factor is not, and that's kind of why it's, why it says it tends to discount the advantage of large journals over small ones. And it's an important tool for journal evaluation, but again, it is widely criticized, and it was sort of on the way out for a while. I think people are reviving it. It's still widely used. Here's a distribution of impact factors in the sort of marine conservation field in that guide that I presented you guys. And you guys, I actually see this relationship a lot in social science there. It's a very skewed distribution. When I look at things like material style of wealth, material style of life, this is kind of the distribution that I tend to see. And you can see there's a couple of outliers there, sort of nature and science. There's a real heavy peak at like sort of 0 to 1 and sort of 1 to 2, that sort of area. And then it sort of declines. And there's really like not many options above 4 there. There's really not that much. Again, this is out of date. And the reason that being out of date is important because impact factors grow every single year. They increase every single year. So when a journal calls you up or whatever, sends an email and says our impact factor increased, they all do every year. If it increases a lot, that's a different thing. So I got an email today from Conservation Biology. I'm on the board there. It increased from like around 4 to 5.8. So that was actually a big bump in that. That's actually kind of a huge one. So so they were excited about that. That's not just normal creep. That's actually an increase in citations of the articles in there. But everyone, I think it increases about 0.2 a year on average. Because every year there's more scientists and there's more papers and there's more journals and it's just happening. So more things are going to get cited. But I guess the point here is that, we've got a metric in Australia, which is like in our KPIs in our institution, which is, journals above 4. But, in the sort of things here, there's not that many of them there. There's not a whole lot of options in that area. And here I've just listed some of the journals. This is actually 2 pages worth of things, but, I've listed the ones by impact factor here. I've organized it by impact factor, and you can see sort of science and nature, and then the ecology journals tend to do better than a lot of the social science ones. But these are ones that have published social sciencey stuff. PNAS, current biology. Again, a lot of these are biology ones that sometimes will take some sort of social ecological studies there. You'll actually get this, so you can, yeah, you'll have a copy of this as well. So, you know, things like review journals like Fish and Fisheries, really high, and then you get down to the, you know, the twos pretty quickly. So that's the status, just sort of by impact factor. You know, the length of manuscript may be an important determinant in there. I've submitted something. I submitted one of my most cited papers, actually. I submitted it to Biological Conservation because it was a review paper that I'd done that was of a certain length, and they accepted articles of that length. I wanted to send, originally, I wanted to do it for conservation biology, but I couldn't get it down to that word length. It was a big, thick review, and so I sent it to a journal that had that word length. Typically, I don't advise that as a strategy. I typically advise figuring out your audience and writing your paper to that audience. But in this case, you know, we couldn't do it and ended up sending it there, and it did fine. Again, you know, the quality of your paper, you can be honest about that. You know, is it really good? Is it pretty average work? Is it subpar? Be honest about the quality of the work and choose the journal that reflects that. You know, there's costs involved in publishing. We talked about that a little bit earlier, right? Some journals will reduce or waive page fees for scholars from developing countries or for students. So these policies are typically laid out on their websites, so you can find out if they're willing to do that. There's always charges for open access. So maybe ask yourself whether you really need that. You know, if it's $3,000 to publish that in an open access journal versus another one, think about how much you need it to be open access. But you can sort of figure out, okay, do you need it to be open access? One of the interesting things for me, and we'll talk a little bit more about open access later, but I very regularly, when I paid a lot of money to have things open access, I very regularly get emails asking me for that paper. So even though it's open access, people don't even check that it's open access, and they just ask you for that. So, you know, is it worth three grand? How many papers are you publishing? What's the opportunity cost with that money? We'll discuss open access a little bit, a bit more. But, you know, some journals don't charge for certain things. They don't charge for color figures. So maybe you've got 3 color figures and they're $500 each. So you might choose a journal that doesn't charge for those. That's okay. So think about costs in what you're doing. And precedent. Have they published work on that topic before? I think a great way to think about where your article belongs is to look at your reference section. If it's all marine policy, if you've cited 80% of the work there is from marine policy, it's probably not a science paper, right? It probably belongs in marine policy because that's where the discourse on what you're doing is really happening. That's the action arena for that. So that's probably where you should do. So take a look at your bibliography when you're done and say, is it actually reflective of the journal that I'm hoping to send this to? And, you know, yeah. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about open access, right? There was a study in 2010, and granted that's a while back now, but after controlling for the type of paper, whether it was a review or research paper, its length, the author's citation profiles, because big name authors tend to get more citations, and whether the author or the publisher released the paper in open access. Open access had no statistically significant influence on the overall number of citations per journal paper. And there was little evidence that journal papers or book chapters published in open access received more citations from authors in developing countries relative to those journal papers or book chapters not published in open access, right? So this was a quantitative assessment of how important was open access for publishing in the field of conservation. And they found it wasn't that important. Now that being said, there's been, since the time of the study, which was a while back, there's been a broader push for open access across diverse fields, right? And that occurred after the study was done. OA appears to be more downloaded as opposed to more cited, And that can be important for being accessible to practitioners who can use it to inform on-the-ground action. And there are ethical reasons to consider open access. One thing to think about regarding open access. So journals typically allow you to put the preprints up. Now this is what you submit to them on the last time you submitted. It's not the proofs that you received back with their typesetting and their name on it, but it's what you submitted in the last version. You can typically post that on your website, on ResearchGate, on any of those forums. You can't post the final version or the proofs, but you can post all of the material. It's just not nicely formatted. So if freedom of information is your concern, if that's legitimately what your concern is, you probably don't need $3,000 to do that. You can publish those preprints for free, and that's totally accepted by most journals. That's not all journals though, so some of the really top journals don't allow you to do that. One of the things we're finding though is that the top journals now make it open access after 6 months, right? Another thing that's actually neat is with Nature and Nature Climate Change, they actually sent me a link that allows people to download it for free.